Welcome to the Inside Carolina podcast. I am your host, Tommy Ashley. A little special podcast we got going on here today. Got Greg Barnes and Buck Sanders with me to talk Carolina 2021 football schedule. It is out finally. January 28th, ACC drops the league slates across the board. Before we get started, let me tell you to rate us, review us, and subscribe on Apple iTunes, however you get your podcast, and also subscribe on YouTube to get all this content delivered straight to your smart device. And also support Johnny T-Shirt. They are our great sponsors. I'll talk about them a little bit later. Buck Sanders, right off, I'll come to the Presidente. I think the schedule works out pretty good for North Carolina.
I do think so as well, Tommy. Of course, there's the leadoff game with Virginia Tech, and which we can talk about down the stretch. But I thought that it would be better for the UNC schedule to be backloaded rather than front loaded. And the reason I think that is because it takes a while for the offense to hit its stride, and North Carolina has a bunch of defensive players coming in that could really help them in the 2021 class. So it was my thought initially it would be better for the schedule to be backloaded rather than front loaded. And my looking at it, and some people will, ding me on this, but I think the three toughest teams they have to play in 2021 are Miami, Notre Dame, and NC State. And that's the NC State piece is where I'll get dinged. But I think it's probably about as good a schedule as North Carolina could have hoped for.
Greg, your overall thoughts? I mean, 7 home games, which is good. Wake Forest back on there at home as a non-conference game, which is always interesting. But to Buck's point, when you gloss over it overall, I think it's middle loaded. But anyway, what's your thought?
Yeah, I certainly understand Buck's point about it being backloaded, and I would agree with him about Miami and Notre Dame, and probably NC State being the three toughest games. But I think this year, partly because of the fact that the NCAA has its eligibility rule in place, so teams like Virginia Tech and Pittsburgh, for example, are benefiting more so than others because they're getting some key starters back that otherwise would have exhausted eligibility last year. And also because you've got a number of quarterbacks returning, and that's not always the case. So I think the ACC is actually going to be significantly better next year than it was this year. And so because of that, while I do agree that it's backloaded, I think there are tough games throughout, and there are enough games, Duke, which should give North Carolina a little bit of a breather, but they're going to have to play well early. But I totally agree with the idea that North Carolina is going to need to rely on some of those freshmen coming in, especially on the defensive side, and that should help them in the second half of the season against some of these tougher teams.
But let's do the out of conference first. And it's weird talking about Wake Forest as an out of conference game, and then Notre Dame when they were in it last year. But I think this is 2 clear wins, 2 blowout wins, and then Wake Forest is always sneaky. I don't know what they'll have next year. I haven't really researched them. But that was a tough game for Carolina this year. And then at Notre Dame, that's the bellwether game for the season. I mean, that could be a top 5, top 10 matchup without question in South Bend. But how do you like the makeup of the out of conference portion of this deal?
Well, it's for me, I don't think it's a bad time to play Notre Dame. I mean, they get a bye week ahead of Notre Dame. I don't think Notre Dame is going to be quite as good as they were last year. It remains to be seen, where North Carolina is at that point. But I do think it's worthwhile to talk about. We're looking at the schedule from this point forward, and we really don't know what the roster makeup is going to be at, in fall camp. We don't know what the roster makeup is going to be when they match up on October 30th. And Tommy, I do plan on trying to go to that South Bend game. I've never been to South Bend. I think I'm going to go this year. So
Definitely
uh,
worth the trip.
I,
100%.
I think I'm going to go to Pittsburgh and to Notre Dame because those are the only two ACC stadiums. Well, Notre Dame is not really ACC, but those are the only two stadiums I haven't been to. So I think I might plan on making that trip. But we do need to caveat all of this by saying that it doesn't just matter, where these teams are when they come out of fall camp. It matters when they match up. So there's a lot we don't know about when North Carolina is playing these teams. For us to predict at this point, how they would fare going forward is kind of a crapshoot. So that's kind of where I'm at with all of that. I do think that based on what we know now, Miami, Notre Dame, NC State may be the three toughest games that North Carolina play, and I like where they are in the schedule. Although the Virginia Tech game is interesting in a lot of ways. Number one, if Virginia Tech loses that game, all we're going to be talking about from this point forward is whether Fuente will survive the season. And Fuente knows that, so he's going to have his team prepared. On the flip side of the coin, Mack Brown knows that his team is going to be ranked in the top 10, or somewhere close to the top 10. And so if he doesn't win that game, then North Carolina's prospects for 2021 take a hit. And whoever wins that game, as Mark Packer and Wes Durham both said this morning, plants a flag for the Coastal Championship. So all those things are a part of what we're looking at. And again, what we know now is not as much as what we're going to know when we get out of fall camp.
Oh yeah, you better get your predictions ready because come August 25th, we're going to be doing our famed Inside Carolina
Well,
prediction.
since I cleaned y'all's clock last time,
it's 2020, man. It doesn't count. It's asterisk.
Oh, okay.
Greg, with that being said, I mean, we are assuming that everything will be close to back to normal so that this schedule will go off as it is now. We shall see soon enough. But let me ask you this aspect of it. I've always liked the idea of teams opening with a big game. A lot of people don't. A lot of people like to ease into it with an out of conference, Georgia State, if you're looking at this, or a Wofford. But I feel like this game against Virginia Tech up there, whether it's Thursday or Friday, gives Mack Brown something to look at all year other than just the first game. It is a meaningful game. Like Buck said, it is hugely important on the season. Your take on that idea?
Well, I certainly agree that with it being Virginia Tech and being somewhat of a rival, especially in the Coastal Division, that's beneficial for motivation in the offseason. No doubt about it. But like Buck, I watched the ACC Network morning show. I don't know if cringe is the right word. Certainly disagreed with the take that they were presenting. Because if you look at these two programs, one is going like this and one is going like that. And so I don't think there's any question North Carolina will be a heavy favorite in this game. The Hokies are 19-18 over their past 3 seasons. Had a lot of people leave in the offseason, lost Hendon Hooker to the transfer portal, lost their best running back, lost their best offensive lineman. They do have some key pieces coming back, as I mentioned earlier, because of that eligibility rule. So that's beneficial. But I think this is an opportunity. You talk about planting a flag. This is an opportunity on a national scene in a primetime game to start the season when North Carolina can roll into Lane Stadium and smack the Hokies around. This is not a prediction pod, but if North Carolina does not beat up on the Hokies, you can bury them on their home field. I think you can do that, and you can escort Justin Fuente out of Blacksburg most likely. I don't see that game being particularly close. I don't think that's one of the toughest games on the schedule by far. And I think that's one where North Carolina should embrace it. Great motivation for the offseason, but they should circle that one to know that they have to go up there and beat some tail to really get the season started off right. And I think they should do it. And that should be the expectation.
Tommy, let me jump in there.
Yep.
I agree with about 30% of what Greg just said. But it's in Blacksburg. And Greg is a big if they haven't done it before, I'm not buying into it kind of guy. Right. And they've beaten Virginia Tech twice, I think, since Virginia Tech entered the ACC. And Greg and I were side by side in the press box during one of those and laughed about it all the way home. But 2009,
that was a big upset game.
Yeah, it was a big upset game. Yeah. So, but here's the thing. I as I said, I agree with a lot of, 30% of what Greg said. But, Virginia Tech is going to be highly motivated. It's true that if you look objectively at the talent on both teams, North Carolina is the more talented team. No question about it. And Sam Howell is going to be a third-year starter, at that game. But, that's the kind of game like the Florida State game where not necessarily the most talented team wins. And I'll take an early bet with Greg. I don't think that North Carolina will be favored by more than 5 points in that game. If they're a 5-point favorite, I would be surprised. So
it depends on who Virginia Tech brings in, because like Greg said, they lost to everybody. They'll have a bunch of guys that played for somebody else last year.
Well, they got a good piece of their defense coming back. That as Greg's article talked about on Inside Carolina, I think they had 3 seniors decide to come back and play. So, it's an ACC game, and they give out 85 scholarships just like everybody else does, and so we don't know. I mean, I don't like Braxton Burmeister as a quarterback. He's not my favorite, particularly because he throws for well under 60% completions, and in today's world, if you're not completing at least 60% of your passes, you're not a top echelon quarterback. And so, but that said, it's not going to shock me if North Carolina goes up there and Burmeister throws for 300 and rushes for 100. I do think that North Carolina's defense is going to be better than the defense that played Virginia Tech last year. And I don't think Virginia Tech's offense is going to be as good as the one that played North Carolina last year. So we'll see. If you put a gun to my head, I'd probably say that North Carolina is going to win that game, but going up there and slapping them around and winning by 62-26, I'm not ready to go there yet.
You sound like a hedge fund baby, Buck. You hedging on everything you talking about. Take a side, man. I'm joking.
Okay, I think I did. I don't think that North Carolina is going to win as big as Greg says they are, and I think it could be a tight game decided by a field goal. So
let's get a bet right now. Let's get a January 28th bet on that game.
I got a double-digit North Carolina victory in Blacksburg.
All right, Buck, you take it. 11, 10 or more, 10 or more, less than 10. All right.
I will take a bet with Greg that North Carolina wins by less than 10.
What are we betting?
I don't know.
Around the golf at Pinehurst. I'm in for that.
Bottle of whiskey. How about that?
Yeah, we can go with that. But, I buy cheap whiskey, so that's not a big win for you.
Well, Greg's idea of cheap whiskey is like $100 a bottle, so he'll go for that.
No.
All right, let's look. Y'all threw me off. I had good questions lined up. Now I'm thinking about whiskey and playing golf. Greg, I'll come your way. This is something that I think we'll find interesting. Carolina hiccuped against Virginia and Florida State. where are the hiccup games in this schedule for North Carolina?
That's a good question, Tom. And as I said earlier, I really think the ACC is going to be better as a whole. And so while I do openly bang on Virginia Tech, I don't think Virginia Tech's near as good as some of the other teams on this schedule. I mean, Georgia State, clear victory, right? Virginia, I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily a hiccup. I think Virginia's going to be pretty good. That's going to be a tough game. They've won 4 straight against Carolina. I mean, Georgia Tech, Duke, they're not. I mean, I think Georgia Tech will be good eventually. They're not there yet. FSU by October. I mean, if Mackenzie Milton somehow can play and be 90% of what he was, maybe Norvell can get that turned around. So that's a competitive game, right? I mean, I think State will be pretty good. I think Wake's going to be good because they return pretty much everybody. North Carolina needed a 21-point rally to beat them last year. I think Pittsburgh's going to be good. And I know people bang on me because I'm a Pat Narduzzi fan. So I think there's a lot of games that are going to be challenging. And so some of those are going to be games where North Carolina may only be favored, kind of to Buck's point, may only be favored by a touchdown or so. And, touchdown favorites only win, 70 or so % of the time. So some of those games are probably going to happen where North Carolina could stub its toe very easily. But I think there is a clear difference in some of the bad teams like the Wofford and Georgia State and Duke, probably Georgia Tech, where North Carolina could play their C game and win. And then a lot of these other games against decent opponents.
You're right about Florida State. I mean, they brought in some good transfers, and Mackenzie Milton was just a monster at his last stop. And then nobody mentioned the Miami game. And this is one that if you look at Inside Carolina message boards, a lot of people wanted that game to be early with the Eric King in question. And I guess N'Kosi Perry stayed after all.
No, he's not.
Perry's changed his mind again?
He pulled his name out solely to graduate this spring, and then he's transferring anyway.
Okay, so De'Aaron King or bust for Miami, at least at this point. They've got the Garcia fella.
Yeah.
So that'll be an interesting matchup. And you got to think Miami's got that game circled to try to get some payback. Buck is the bye, and this is probably irrelevant, but is the bye at a good spot for North Carolina? I would have liked to have seen it a couple of weeks before. But leading into Notre Dame, is that a good spot for Carolina?
I think it's an excellent spot, and for these reasons. Not to discount anyone, but North Carolina should prevail pretty easily over Georgia State. If they don't, then what are we even talking about football for? And then at Georgia Tech, that could be somewhat competitive through 2.5 quarters. But if it's more competitive after that, again, we're overestimating what North Carolina's going to be. And then you got Duke on October 2nd. And I don't even know what adjective to use when I talk about Duke next year. They're not going to be very good.
Back to the normal Duke we all knew and loved.
Not good.
Not good. They're not going to be good. They weren't great last year, and they're losing what?
I'm not
half
sure
their
losing.
team.
I'm not sure losing the quarterback's a bad thing, but they do lose Rump. Rumpf was pretty solid.
Duke's not going to be very good. So you got Georgia State, you got Duke, Georgia Tech. You got those 3 games in the front end of the schedule. So to your point, I'm not seeing a lot of competitive ball games in the first half, except for Florida State. Florida State should be a game that North Carolina has circled on their schedule because Florida State beat them last year. And Florida State, believe it or not, is a very talented team, regardless of the transfers they got coming in, the quarterback and other people. But if you look at the 24/7 team ranking composites, Florida State is an extremely talented team. So we'll see how that comes together for them. But in some ways, in that first half of the schedule, North Carolina they're not getting a bye, but they are getting teams that are going to be weaker than the teams that they play in the back half of the schedule. They'll have to play Miami after they play Florida State, but after that they get a bye. And Georgia State, they're going to play a lot of freshmen. Duke, they'll probably play a lot of freshmen. At Georgia Tech, they'll probably play a lot of freshmen. I mean, there are opportunities there to, I'm not going to call them a bye because I'll get slammed for that, but opportunities to work on roster and depth chart and all of that, get people experience that they, will be able to use on the back half of the schedule. And so then you get the bye in front of Notre Dame. I think it's at the perfect spot, to be honest with you.
That's fair. 100% fair. We'll call those games bye-like so as not to offend.
Bye adjacent.
Well, let me ask you this, Tommy. The only surprise on the schedule when it was released was Wake Forest. And that game had been penciled in for the end of September, for 5 years. So when you look at this schedule, North Carolina's, the final 6 weeks of the regular season, Pittsburgh is the only Coastal Division game. And so while we are talking about this schedule being backloaded, Notre Dame's non-conference, Wake Forest is non-conference, Wofford is non-conference, NC State is Atlantic Division crossover. So we're going to have a pretty good idea of where North Carolina is relative to the ACC championship game as soon as that Miami game is over with on October 16th. That is before the bye week. And so while I agree with Buck certainly about some of these teams in the first half really are not that good, there are a lot of Coastal Division opponents there. And so I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I just wanted to throw it out there because I did think that was interesting that the majority of the non-conference games are late in the year this year.
Well, when I'm looking at it, it's why I'm torn on whether I like divisions or not. Because if there weren't divisions, then it wouldn't matter, right? But like you said, they can stack up at least a lot of tie-breaking wins before the Miami game or up through the Miami game. And so, if they're 6-0 in the conference after Miami, they're pretty much locked in to the ACC championship game, regardless of what happens the rest of the season. And I don't necessarily like that. That's fun to see, but I'd like to see competition.
And the other component too is that I think Miami only plays 2 Coastal games or 2 ACC games before that Carolina matchup. So if they happen to win the Carolina game, then Miami has a lot of work to do remaining, and Carolina's just basically sitting around saying, okay, we have all these non-conference games left, and we have to see kind of what Miami does to tell us about our future.
Well, it's a little confusing, right? Because even though North Carolina doesn't play any Coastal Division games after the Miami game, a bunch of Coastal Division teams do. So the Coastal Division race may not be decided, by the Miami game because Miami is, got to play some Coastal Division teams. Virginia Tech's going to have to play some. And, while we're on that point, because this is going to come up down the road and we're going to be talking about it from now until the preseason, but I see this unlike most Coastal Division years where anybody can win. I think it's going to be North Carolina or Miami, one of those two. I don't see another Coastal Division team being able to compete for the title in 2021. Am I wrong in that, Greg? Are you looking at it in the same way? I don't see a Virginia Tech or a Virginia or a Pittsburgh or anybody else, sneaking into the championship, Coastal Division championship conversation. I think it's either going to be North Carolina or Miami. And so in some ways, we might say that the biggest game of the season might come on October the 16th against Miami in Keenan.
Yeah, and I think the other element of that, and I agree that it's going to be Carolina or Miami, is that you do have a lot of teams capable of playing spoiler, though. mean, I do think Virginia can win a game against North Carolina or Miami. I do think Pittsburgh can win a game against Carolina or Miami. Virginia Tech, I don't necessarily think so, but maybe they can.
Who's the home team between Virginia and Miami this year? I think that makes a difference because
Miami's
Virginia,
at home.
yeah, Virginia is a much better home team than a road team over the last. Look at it over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah,
they play tough at home, and when they're not at home, they don't play nearly as tough. I don't know if that's something we can hang our hat on, but that's just how it's been.
Well,
and they got a tough stretch there too because they're at UNC, Wake Forest on a short week, and then at Miami on a short week.
Yeah, well, if you look at Miami, all right, Miami opens with Alabama, and Florida State has not been the same since they played Alabama. How many years ago?
Yeah.
I mean,
Miami may only have half of their roster left after they play Alabama.
Remember when Alabama and Michigan opened the season several years ago? We hadn't heard about Michigan since. I mean, those are games.
DeAndre Francois still having nightmares, I think.
I mean, those are games that wreck entire seasons, and Miami's got to do that. And then they play App, and Michigan State's not any good. What's interesting to me when I look at the schedule and when you look at the whole ACC forums, I mean, I think Carolina's got a pretty good breakup. It's, they've got 3 home games in a row there in October, which I don't really like from a fan perspective because that's a lot of straight weeks to do it. But when you look at Virginia Tech's schedule, Virginia Tech's loaded. They play 2 straight, then away, and then 4 straight at home. And then they've got at Duke at home, at Miami, at Virginia. I know there's no rhyme or reason to be able to put this together or to try to have a rhyme or reason, but it is tough to NC State, for example. They play at Boston College, at Miami, Louisville at home, at Florida State, at Wake. I mean, they just so many disjointed schedules, I think. But when I look at Miami's, the first thing I see is Alabama in the kickoff classic, and I'm like, they're dead. They're going to get destroyed. So
do you dare start Derek King if he is cleared like the middle of August? Do you put him in that game?
I think.
I don't see how you don't. I mean,
I think Diaz will definitely put him in if he's ready to go. I mean, he's not going to hold him out.
Yeah.
If he's not 100% ready to go and they play him in that, that could be the last we see of Derek King all year. I mean, it's just. I mean, Miami.
Yeah, we don't wish anybody any bad luck, but that's just how it is,
Yeah, that'll be interesting to watch, and then they get those 4 straight home games. But Greg, is the short week for Carolina. Hold on a second. Let me talk about Johnny T-shirt right fast. Johnny T-shirt, JohnnyT-shirt.com. Great sponsors of Inside Carolina. Great friends of Inside Carolina. Buck loves them. Jason Staples always loves them. You can't beat it.
I love them, Tommy. Come on.
And Greg loves them, but I can't get Greg to wear anything other than a golf shirt.
Where can we get a woohoo out of you, Greg? There, I mean,
it's too
I got to work on my woohoos. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's got.
You can go.
There we go.
He's got. That's awkward. We still love Johnny T-shirt though, and what's cool about Johnny T-shirt is I'm gonna get to go see him sometimes this fall because I've got a new Tar Heel in the family, and he's got to go get Carolina gear when he goes to Chapel.
Oh, did he get in?
Davis got in. Yes, sir.
Woohoo. That's a big woohoo.
Absolutely. 4 generations of Tar Heels from this family. So while Inside Carolina is definitely an awesome part, North Carolina is the hugest part of this family, and he is the next in line. So he will shop at Johnny T-shirt and JohnnyT-shirt.com. He will get to know them well. I'm going to take another break. Let the National Guys pay some bills. We'll be right back with special 2021 Carolina football podcast schedule football podcast, something like that. We'll be right back. Boys, it's been a long day. We're back. InsideCarolina.com podcast. Greg Barnes, Buck Sanders. Started to ask about the short week, Greg, leading up to Carolina's game at Pittsburgh. Does that matter? I mean, Pitt's away before that. At least Carolina's got a home game. So, first of all, give me some news on why Carolina plays Pittsburgh on a Thursday night every time they go up there. And B, does it matter that it's Thursday on a short week?
Yeah, there clearly is some kind of agreement, right, with why they always play at Heinz Field. I know Pittsburgh always hosts a home game on Thursday night just because that is Heinz Field. It's the Steelers field, and so that helps out a little bit with their scheduling. Carolina really doesn't want home games on Thursday night, except for the rare occasion. And for some reason, that's just worked for the ACC. Every other year, that's an easy one to slot in. Beyond that, I don't know. It'd be worth asking if there's anything more than that to it. But in terms of the short week, you're at Notre Dame, then you have Wake. So you have a road game against, that could be a top 10 matchup. And then Wake is a local team. You know how those games have gone recently. They've been very competitive. And then as we talked about earlier, given the way the Coast was set up, I mean, that Pittsburgh game could be important. It could be a key for North Carolina. And so it makes it a challenge, because what's going to happen is, as soon as that Wake game is over on Saturday, Mack and his staff have to get to work. They've got to start planning, because the team will have a condensed week, and then they'll have to get on the road up to Pittsburgh. So it will be a little bit of a challenge for the team. But this is why those kids play the games. I think we make it a bigger deal than what it is, but no doubt it's outside of your normal operating procedure, and coaches and players are creatures of habit. So having to adjust sometimes can pose some problems.
I think the last time North Carolina had a short week against Pittsburgh, they won. You'd have to check the math on that for me, Greg, but I think they had a short week against Pittsburgh a couple of years ago or 3 years ago and came away with a win. Pittsburgh's only beaten UNC once, I think, since they came into the league, and I think that was probably
that was Mack's first year, was it not? Up there, that was probably a short week. Fedora was undefeated against Pittsburgh, if I remember.
Yeah.
For some reason, that's one of the anomalies of coaching. Buck, the reason that Thursday at Pitt irritates me personally is because you talked about going to see a game at Pittsburgh. They put it on Thursday night, and it messes with the working man.
Well, you're about ready to retire anyway, aren't you, Tommy?
We're getting close. Still got a couple more years. Buck's the young one. I mean, Greg's the young one of the bunch here.
Well, yeah, you could probably get the Friday off, ahead of the Pittsburgh game.
Well, let me slip this in. So, in 15 was that short week that the Buck was talking about. North Carolina won that one 26-19. And then the last two times they've played up there in 17 and then again in 19, both, of course, Thursday night games, they actually had 10 days to prepare. So they've had it both ways, and they've had plenty of success both ways.
It's a weird anomaly. I'd like to hear somebody in the ACC talk about it.
Well, North Carolina doesn't want to play on Thursday night in Keenan, right?
That's 100%. But that was Zero Dark Thursday on Thursday night. Yeah, obviously. Yeah. And then the Florida State game in 2008 was on Thursday. Those were great atmospheres.
But they don't want to play on Thursday night in Keenan, but they're obligated under contract to play a Thursday night game every other year, Greg. Is that right? Or something along those lines?
It's very frequent. They have to play them. So
yeah. So I think that's why UNC ends up in Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh's fine on playing a Thursday night because they're in the Steelers stadium.
Yep.
And the stadium's off campus. It doesn't interfere with their, classes or anything like that. So I guess they've gotten into a comfort zone doing it that way.
It's a fun place too. Ideally, they'd play on a Saturday in September. You'd go see the Pirates play on Friday, go see Carolina play Saturday, and maybe the Steelers were at home too as well on Sunday. That would be the ideal Pittsburgh trip.
I've got a question for Greg and for you too, Tommy. Do you see a trap game on the schedule? That's something everybody always talks about. Is there a trap game on this schedule for UNC?
The only one I can think of would be Florida State, because for the reasons we've talked about, and as Buck pointed out, Florida State's not been bad because of talent. They've been bad just because of culture. And I think, not to speak for Staples, but I think Jason likes Mike Norvell, and thinks that culture can get turned
He
around.
liked Willie Taggart too there for a while. So
Yeah, true. But if that culture gets turned around, and as I said, if Mackenzie Milton has some comeback player of the year type thing going on, but it takes him a little bit of time to kind of get going, that could be a game where we're talking about Miami as, two potential undefeated teams, and Florida State's sitting there after the Duke game. You're ready to kind of strike back and ruin that conversation. That's the only one that I see.
If they hadn't lost last year, I could see that. I don't think they don't get overlooked this year because they lost that one last year. Because that one last year, even though I think ultimately Carolina still plays in the Orange Bowl and all that stuff last year, even if they had beaten Florida State.
that's the game the entire fan base talks about, even more so than the Virginia loss, losing to Florida State.
So I don't think that's right. If I had to pick a trap, I want to say Wake Forest, simply because Wake Forest is always better than people give them credit for, even though it may not show in their record. And then maybe at Pittsburgh, just depending on how the schedule goes. But if Florida State or Virginia sneak up on North Carolina, I'd be extremely shocked. So I think we've covered it all, at least for the January version of the schedule podcast. Buck, I am going to ask you a question that you're not going to like. Predict your record right now, 9 months before the season. Just give me a record, quick. Don't think about it.
I'm going to say the ESPN Football Power Index is going to peg North Carolina at 8.5 wins. That's where I'm going.
Whew, so listeners, 8.5, take the over or under. Greg, what's your pick?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Really? So if Carolina went 9-3, you guys would think it was a successful season?
Yeah, they were 8-4 last year.
Baby steps. I say 10 wins. 10 wins floor.
I think
I'm surprised you didn't say 11, Tommy.
10 wins floor. Do we need to have this conversation? We've already had it on the message board. Do we need to have it here?
Might as well flash it out.
How many times has Carolina won 10 games since 1888?
Well, here's the question. Here's a question, and to end the conversation, is North Carolina strong enough, as Jason Staples would say, in the trenches to beat the teams they're supposed to beat? If that's true, 10 wins is on the table.
Sure.
If not, then we're looking at something less than 10 wins. That's how I come out.
Yeah, but that's what I say. We're talking about like expectation and goals versus floor. So when we're talking about 10 wins as a floor, that's if everything that goes bad that could go bad, we're sitting at 10 wins.
And by the way, when I said 8.5, I said that's what the ESPN Football Power Index is going to say.
There's the hedge, baby.
Yeah, I'm doing that 100%, covering my butt all the way through. But that's what I think the Power Index. I think that's where they'll come out.
I think 9-3 in the regular season is a decent season. I think 10 should be what it is. So I would set the over under at 9.5.
They've won 9 games. How many times since 97? Greg?
Does Keyshawn Silver know, or was he even alive at all that stuff? That's my point on those kind of things.
Yeah,
These guys don't know that.
Greg is that if they ain't done it before, I'm not believing it kind of guy.
I've got to see it. I mean,
yeah.
But that's like saying
I'm putting it on Greg, not on me. So
okay, we'll debate this plenty in this offseason, spring, and then you guys are going to have to predict it. And we're putting money on our preseason podcast, and we are,
or at least a bottle of bourbon or something like that.
Well, that's cash to me because it's less cash out of my pocket. Boys, it's been fun. Buck Sanders and Greg Barnes. I've been your host, Tommy Ashley. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Tommy.
Enjoyed it, guys, as always.
Yep. Support Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com, and always subscribe to Inside Carolina Podcast. Thanks.